Good morning, good day, everyone. Actually, hello, everyone, and welcome to lesson number six. Lesson number six in our dive or our delve into the wonderful world of musical theory. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day. So, today we're going to be diving a bit into the specifics of the treble clef. Now, I'll preface this lesson by saying that if you haven't seen the previous lesson, you definitely should, because there I attack what a clef means. What does a clef mean? And if you haven't watched that lesson, or if you don't know what a clef means, I would really encourage you to go watch that lesson so you get an understanding of what we're talking about today. But to briefly summarize what we talked about in that lesson, a clef's main purpose is to tell you which line which line and space on the staff correspond to which pitches, or you can think of it as keys on the piano. Oh, sorry, what's wrong with me? Pitches. So that is the main purpose of a clef, and we learned that a treble clef is used when you want to write things which play in a higher register, or more generally the right side of the piano, the higher side of the piano, because we can't for example, instruments like violin, flute, these all play relatively high. So we use treble clef, which, in case you didn't know from that lesson, looks something like this, very famous. We use the treble clef because the treble clef makes these five lines pretty high on the right side of the piano. These five lines are pretty high in the case of the treble clef and are well suited to write instruments write for instruments like the violin and the flute in terms of these five lines. For example, if I wanted to write instruments in for like the cello or the bassoon, for instruments like the cello or the bassoon, I would make use of the bass clef, a different clef, so that I could still fit all my music comfortably within five lines rather than having to dip below, five or six different times. This is just a brief recap of what we covered last lesson. If you feel you're not understanding this, I really do encourage you to go watch that. That being said, today we're going to get into specifics of, yes, exactly which pitches correspond to which lines and spaces in the case of the treble clef. Most of my lessons are much more conceptual, talking about the underlying concepts and decisions behind the way we write music. This one's going to be much more content based because it's really just a convention. Now, before we move forward, there are two rules. I wouldn't really call them rules, but for lack of a better word, honestly, there are two rules that we have to remember. Okay, number one. Um, for example, if the pitches on any clef on this tape are always in sequence. Now, what do I mean by that? That means that if this space is A, this line this line, if for example, won't be D, and this line won't be F or whatever, right? The space, they don't go in random order, or they don't go in like this kind of interspaced order. If this is line if this space happens to be A, the line above it will be B, the space above it will be C, and the line above that will be D, and so on and so forth. It will be in sequence and in order. So there's no random, this one's A, then that one's D, that one's F. So the pitches are in sequence, in that order, in that particular sequence. Pitches are in sequence. So they move in that sequence, A, B, C, D, F, G. Now, second thing you might have just noticed from the way I described that, when we're talking about clefs, we're talking about staff lines, we only talk about natural pitches. By default, each line in space only refers to natural pitch. Now, if you're left dumbfounded by what this word means, I encourage you to watch my second lesson about pitch, because I give you much better understanding for what pitch is and what this word means. But again, if you just need a recap, it's only the letters. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like that. That's it. No sharps and flats. And we will get into how to write sharps and flats later on. and we'll get into that in depth. But by default, each line in space only refers to a natural pitch, not a sharp nor a flat. And we'll get into how to write them down in key signatures and stuff much later. But for now, these are the two things to keep in mind. So number one, the pitches are always in sequence, right? Leave it. Sorry, my lines are terrible, but yes. So number one, pitches are always in sequence. That means it's always A, B, C, D, E. It's not A, F, G. Like, it doesn't work like that, right? It's always in sequence. And number two, by default, the way these staff lines work is that each line in space only addresses a natural pitch and not sharps and flats. We'll get into how to write sharps and flats later. That being said, I gave it to you straight. So in the treble clef, the bottom line, this bottom line, the first line, is E. The first space is F. The second line is G. The second space, the space above that, is A. The third line, or the middle line, is B. The fourth space is C. The fourth line is D, or the second last line, you can think of it like that. The fourth space is, once again we come back to E, as you know, in what we discussed in lesson number 2, and the final line, or the fifth line, is F. And there you have it. So yeah, this is it. So the bottom line is E, then above the space above that is F, and the line above that is G, and that goes on till you reach F at the last line. And this is what the 5 lines correspond to on the treble clef. So let's guess, what does this mean? That means if I had a note placed here, if I placed a note on this point in the staff and I had to read this music, I'd say this note is E because it's placed here. So this means I have to press the key on the piano which corresponds to E when I see this. If there's one which is here on this second line here, I know I have to play G. Why? Because the second line corresponds to G when I have the treble clef. So that's what this means, in case you were wondering, or in case you haven't seen the other lessons. So where I place a note on the staff determines this pitch, and this is exactly how it determines. So bottom line is E, the middle line is B, so on and so forth, in the case of the treble clef. So I would encourage you to pause your screen right here, maybe write this down, because yeah, it's really important. So this is just straight up content. This is the convention, and I explained in my previous video why we use this particular convention. And yes, so now with that being said, I'm not going to let you off so early. So there are a couple of different ways. Now I'll help you out here. There are a couple of different ways you can try to remember this, right? Number one, you could straight up memorize it. First line E, second line G, first space F, like that. And if you're that kind of person, by all means do so. That being said, what a lot of music books like to do, is make use of acronyms. So a lot of music books love to make use of acronyms, and the same ones mostly. So I was never, when I was learning music as a child, I never found these acronyms to be very useful. I give you my personal opinion. I never found them to be that useful. But because they're used so widely in music books, and I can only imagine that they must be useful to a lot of other people. And maybe I'm just not acronym type of person, and you are. So I'll be teaching them to you nonetheless, even though I didn't find them very useful. Now, what you commonly find in music textbooks is, so for the lines on treble clef, here is the acronym. So it goes like this: every good boy does fine. And the way this acronym functions is, the first letter of every word is what the line corresponds to. So and it goes in the order. So this is the first line, that's the second line, third line, and so on and so forth. And you can just double check that this indeed is the case. So E, G, B, D, F, or every good boy does fine. As for the spaces, well, the space is what's commonly used, not an acronym but more of a word, and that word is face. This is literally spelled out all the letters of the space. So this is the first space, second space, third space, and fourth space. Face. It spells it out quite clearly here. So yeah, that being said, these are the acronyms that you'll find in most music textbooks and what is usually taught around to remember this structure on the treble clef. Now another way to do this is the way I did it. Now I came up with this method myself, but I'm sure it must be a very commonly used method. And this is the way I would learn music. I would read treble clef music for the longest time before I gained the ability to sight read. And that is, just remember. All you have to remember, the bottom line is E, and using that you can reverse engineer every other line. So for example, if I've got a note here on this middle line and I want to figure out what that note is, I will look, oh, bottom line is E. That means that the space above that is F. Okay, then this is G, the next space is A, then this space is B. No, sorry, this line is B, because again, so we can go here, E, first space F, G, then second space A, and then the middle line is B. And you can do that for any note on the staff. In fact, you can even reverse engineer all of this from this F to that F just by knowing the bottom line is E, because you know the movement sequence. So that's the way I used to decode music, the treble clef markings before I gain the ability to sight read. Just remember that the bottom line is E and reverse engineer the rest. Hopefully you understood how to do that. Now, if you're wondering what I mean by sight read, well, when you learn through practical music, for example, that's how you learn how to sight read. I can just look at music. I can look at any music you put in front of me and I can tell you, I immediately just look at the note and I know exactly what it is. I don't have to do any counting, I don't have to go through any acronym, I immediately know what it is. And that is called sight reading. And that comes through practical music. When you play an instrument and you learn how to sight read through by practicing with music, that's how you do it. There's no real theoretical way to gain the ability to sight read. Well, there is a theoretical, like you could just try to do it, but it comes most naturally and it's most useful in a practical context. So what I recommend to you is, if you're learning an instrument, find a book which has sheet music in it. And if you find a book which has sheet music in it, practice with that only. Always practice with music. And what that's gonna help you do is you're gonna build that association. This is E, that's G, immediately in your brain, and you'll gain the ability to sight read. That's how you usually gain the ability to sight read. And it's usually only possible through practical music, and it's only useful in practical music because, for example, because I can read the music, I can fluently read the music, right, due to my ability to sight read. If you put music in front of me, I can play it without having practiced it before. I can just sight read it and play it. That's the beauty of sight reading. And of course, in theoretical exams or whatever, or music theory, I have much less of a hassle because, again, I can sight read. But that being said, I don't expect you to be able to sight read, especially if you're learning music theory version. So again, here are a couple of methods. The acronyms are one good way to do it, or you can use my method. Just remember that the bottom line is E. That's all you have to remember, and reverse engineer the rest using these two rules. I slightly prefer my method, but then again, it is my method, or rather the method which I came across. So I would. So you can use either one, and whichever one works for you, you can figure that out. Now, one more thing before we move on, but before I end the lesson, is how to draw the treble clef. So you must have seen me draw this thing all the time, right? I must be wondering how to do it yourself. So let me just give you a brief understanding of how it looks right here. That's some of what it looks like. Now you can find many exercises online of trying to tracing a treble clef or drawing a treble clef. In fact, I'll try to link one after this lesson, in addition to some more resources which I'll get to. But in general, the way to draw it, the way I was taught, and the way you can learn how to draw it is, first draw this kind of a line, which goes like this, squiggly at the top, squiggly at the bottom. If you know maths, then this is an integral sign, right? If you know some higher order maths, but yes, something like this, right? First step. Second step, make sure your pencil goes here and make a cross there, bring it and circle like this. Now I will do it again for you very slowly. So first step, make this squiggly line type thing, then pick this up and do it. And this is very bad, but hopefully you get the idea. And this is meant to circle, the circle bit is meant to come on the second line. So remember that the circle bit is supposed to come on the second line. Now that being said, I'll probably link a resource where you can learn how to draw the treble clef step by step, and hopefully that will be useful to you. In addition to that, I am going to be definitely linking a resource where you can practice. For example, practice what we learned here. Let me just draw 5 lines here. You will have a note written like this, and you have to tell me what exactly it is. There will be a space, and if you've been paying attention, you should be able to figure out that this note, in the case of a treble clef, is G, and for example this one is B. So there's going to be a worksheet like this with a bunch of blanks, and I really encourage you to go do that, because that's the other way you build a good association besides sight reading, and you get a good understanding for how to read the music. And this is probably, and this is quite exciting, because this is probably the first time you're going to probably be properly be reading music, where you can actually look at music and say, oh, I have to press this key on the piano. Regardless, this is a worksheet which I'm going to be leaving right after this lesson, and I encourage you to do that very strongly, because as with practical music, the key to theoretical music and the prowess there is practice. Practice, practice, practice. I'm sure you must have heard me say this before. So anyways, I'll probably link this worksheet, and I've linked that worksheet. Please go do it, and till the next time, hope you found this lesson useful. Hope you gained some tangible knowledge from it, and till the next time, see you later. Bye. Thank you very much.